It's that time of year again. The leaves are turning colors in these mountains, and they're so beautiful. And the frost is in the air, and oh yeah, it's Halloween time. And I'm going to share with you some of these little stories of growing up in these mountains, rural Appalachia. Like to sit around the fire these cold nights. And I'm going to share with you some of my little stories of how I grew up in these mountains. And it still is. Nothing's changed, just a generation. And I can remember back when I was a small thing, 5 or 6 years old, in my finger mashing Ford days. Yeah, an old car that always mashed my fingers. And we used to go up my grandmother's all the time, especially this time of year, and there'd be a bunch of us up there. My brothers and sisters and cousins, and our grandmother would be trying to keep us under control. She never whooped none of us, but boy, she could get our attention real quick. She'd tell some of these stories. We'd get rowdy, how a bunch of kids is. They may be a dozen of us there, and we'd be rowdy. She'd gather us all up, and here goes them stories. She used to tell us little old stories about a witch that lived on top of the mountain, that flew down and get all the little kids that was rowdy, wasn't minding, wasn't doing what they're supposed to do. And we didn't pay much attention to it, but the more she talked, the more we'd listen. And I'd think, this old witch looked like this, didn't it? Mean and evil thing. Used to get the little kids. And then she'd whip out that story, raw head and bloody bones. He lived out in the woods, in a holler, in a tree, hollow tree. And he noticed when the kids wasn't minding, he'd stick that head out, and when it got dark, he'd come down there after them. And I can imagine him being up under the bed just waiting to get one of us. We being mean all the time. But that was just being a child. And there'd be so many of us sleeping at Mama's house. We'd all be piled up in the bed every which way. And I'd be thinking of them stories, scared to death. And I'd hear something over at the window, and just imagine, raw head and bloody bones, looking in on me, trying to get me. She never did keep no curtains on that window, and I begged her to. I'd even put an old sheet up over it. She'd take it down. I believe she done that on purpose. And I'd think I'd see that little ghost of that little girl that witch got. She'd tell them stories. Oh man, the memories I've had of these stories. But them fond memories of a time long ago. And I miss them. Miss them so bad. And as I got older, in school, one thing I never could stand was a bully. I couldn't stand a bully pushing other kids around, and I always tried to stop it, and I usually got the worst end of it, but that's something I never would put up with. But when it come Halloween time, the church we go to always give us a little thing, a little party with candies, dunking for apples, playing games. Them was the good old days. And when it got Halloween night, me and my brothers, we'd get out and we'd dress. We didn't have much money to get nothing. Maybe a little old 25-cent mask or something. And we'd get out on the, Mom and Dad would take us, let us out in town nearby, where a lot of houses was and people lived. And we'd get out and we'd walk down through there, getting an old pillowcase full of candy, if you're lucky. And we could eat on this candy for months. But one night, my brothers was off on another street, and somebody stole their bag. Well, we ain't gonna have that. But he didn't know who it was. They said because he had a mask on. And some of the other kids said they had the same thing happen to them. And this was just before I was right at a teenager. Well, we figured out who it was eventually as time went on. Well, he wasn't going to do that again next Halloween. So just before Halloween, we knowed where an old hornet's nest was, low to the ground, old black hornet. We was lucky they hadn't gone in the hole for winter. It was still warm for that time of year. And we're going to get that, and we're going to teach that bully a lesson. These old hornets are mean too, these old black hornets. Stayed away from them. But anyway, we got an old flour sack for Mom, grandmother, where we could go out. Well, we wouldn't get the other one. She usually makes clothes out of them, dresses, shirts, and they done a good job. Well, anyway, we slept out there at night and got that old hornet's nest and put it in there. Now come Halloween, we were going out there. And them bees, we try to keep them calm as we can because they was buzzing around in there, them hornets. But anyway, he got that bag, thought he was getting a bag of candy, and I shook it up real good just before we gave it to him. And he grabbed it, and we took off running. Well, he opened it up, and them hornets covered him up. He took off running and threw that bag down. Well, that taught him a lesson. He never bothered us no more like that. But you grow up in these old mountain hollers and these teenagers and these boys just playing pranks all the time. They'd cut trees down across the road, turn toilets over, old outhouses, even with people in them. And I've got caught doing some things I shouldn't done anyway, and got a whooping for it. And at school, after school, there's throwing eggs all the time, but that was just teenagers, just pranks all the time. But it was the good old days. Now here's a little spooky story that one of my cousins told me. Growing up, he said, I wasn't with him at the time, but he told me that it was just before Thanksgiving. Air was getting kind of cool, and he'd been down to the school about a half a mile away from the holler. They'd had a football game, and they tried to play them in them days before it got dark because they didn't have no lights like they did nowadays. But anyway, he said he was on his way home. It was just getting dusky dark, and it was about a half a mile walk across the ridge to the holler where he lived. And he told me that he'd sit down and take him a break. It was kind of warm for that time of year. Here, that's the way it is here in the South. It's just one time it's cold, one next day it's warm. But anyway, he said he was taking a break, and he's just getting ready to get up, and he turned around and looked where he just come from, and there was a little girl and a little boy dressed in really old-timey clothes. Well, he didn't think nothing about it. He thought, well, they just come from the school, but he think it was kind of odd. They looked like they was about 6 or 7 years old. And he was fixing to say something, and they just spoke up, the little boy did, and said that they was, could they walk with him home? He said, well, where do you live? We live just over the hill up there on top. And he said, well, what's y'all's name? And the little boy said his name was Willie, and the little girl said her name was Sally. And they was holding hands. And they wanted to walk with him because they said they was scared of the dark. Well, he said, yeah, just follow me. I'm on my way home up there. I live across the ridge too. So they took off walking. And as they walked, he would say something to them every once in a while. He'd stop for a second, let them catch a breath. He'd turn around and would say, well, where's y'all's parents at? How come y'all out this late? And they just shrugged their shoulders up in the air. Didn't really say nothing. Well, they walked on, and they happened to be a little old graveyard just before they got to the crest of the hill, the ridge there. And he said he turned around to ask them, said, well, which house y'all live at? And well, just as he turned around to say that, there was nobody there. he got the eeriest feeling, he said. Just as soon as they got to that graveyard, they just disappeared. What? That scared him to death. He wasn't but a mid-teenager anyway, about 14, 15 years old. And he just run on home and told his mom. And his mom didn't know what to think about it. Well, he told me a day or two later, and I was surprised. So we went back there to that graveyard, and we really couldn't find nothing. It was just an old graveyard with mostly just old rock markers sunken in places in the ground. And we couldn't find no names. So we come on back and we talked to her mama, grandmother. And she said, yeah, that's just an old pauper's graveyard. And a lot of them died, families died of typhoid fever earlier, years ago. And they said, well, they told her the story. And she said, well, it's an old graveyard of typhoid fever. And she could remember a family there when she was young that had a little boy and little girl. They was twins. One was named Willie, one was named Sally. But we never could find no markings. And that just run a chill all over him. And I said, well, I'm glad I wasn't with you, or it would have scared me to death. Well, that's a spooky little old story of a time long ago. But anyway, it's that time of year, just sit around and tell these old stories of how I grew up in these mountains. And as I got older, worked in these old mines, I loved to get out in these woods and still do. But I learned real quick as time went on over the years, there's things in these mountains that we don't know nothing about, don't understand. And most people think we're just crazy. But I'm telling you, there's things in these mountains that we will never understand. Only the good Lord knows. So I hope you enjoyed these little stories of me telling of our people and our experiences in these mountains. So I want you to have a happy Halloween. Take care out there. God bless. And I'll see you next time.